Hello, my name is Nadine and welcome to Hop Along Studio. So in today's video, I wanted to share with you the 3 lessons I learned from this book, The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Flock. You'll notice in this video that I do not use strong language. There is a little bit of strong language in this book, but I have to say that the lessons in this book and the point that he's trying to get across are definitely worth giving this a read. The reason I chose this book as part of the 12 books I was going to read in 2020 was that I have actually read this book before. It was one that was recommended to me a few years ago when I was working through some questions I had about self-care, about mental health, and just about trying to find higher levels of emotional intelligence. Sometimes you need to read some books that are not necessarily the easiest books to read because they are challenging, but I believe the lessons from them are so good that it's something that we need to keep moving ourselves towards so that we have that self-improvement and those relationships that we really want. And because this book for me was so groundbreaking a few years ago, I wanted to add to the list so I could share it with you on my website here, as well as just to allow you to know that this book is out there, because I do think some of these really good groundbreaking books that make us look at how we view the world differently are really important. So the first thing I learned from this book is the idea of choosing carefully what we care about. It's so easy to feel like we have to care about everything and everyone and everything that's going on around us. And Mark actually gets into the idea that happiness is a problem. And I don't actually believe that happiness itself is a problem as much as it is our expectations towards what happiness is supposed to do in our lives. For many of us, we try to move from one happy high to another happy high, and it's not necessarily a bad thing to want happiness or want joy, but the question is, are we willing to deal with the things that bring us to a place of happiness and joy? And that a lot of that is choosing what we're going to care about. We can't care about everything. In a world that tells us you need to have more things, more relationships, more power, more attention, being able to say, actually, I'm going to choose these 3 things as the things I really care about, and that's going to be my focus. That's a very hard thing in this world. It's really quite countercultural. But with choosing about what we care about, that allows us to have the space to really focus on those things. I find that trying to be split in so many directions and having to care about everything, that not only do I feel so much tension, I don't find a lot of happiness in it. By actually being in a place where we need to choose those things, it's very empowering. So instead of feeling anxious or depressed or like you're letting everyone down all the time, by choosing the things that are most important and communicating that to others, that can be a really powerful thing. And being able to really have ownership over what you decide, how you're going to live your life, and what you're going to care about. And so it helps us figure out what we care about. It's our values. By going and understanding what our values are and defining our values, understanding what good and bad values are, which is something Mark talks a lot about in this book, it can help us give us that path towards knowing what is important to us, what we value, and how we can move forward carrying with the things that are truly important. One of the things I learned from this book is the value in suffering. And in society, we do not embrace the value of suffering very often. Even right now, we're in the middle of a pandemic. It's not an easy time. People are dying. People are losing their jobs. People are going through really, really difficult times. And I know a lot of us, including me, are asking why. And so I think it's really important that when we're talking about the value of suffering, that we're not flippant about it. This doesn't mean that we should always be excited about suffering or be so happy that things have gone badly, but it's understanding that there might be a value, a lesson that can be learned, and growth that we can have through that process. One thing I've realized is how many times in my life that suffering caused me to move out of a job into another job. It moved me out of a relationship that wasn't healthy to me to a relationship that was healthy for me. If I didn't have some sort of suffering, I would have never made these choices. I would have never moved from what was comfortable. And that's the importance of suffering, is understanding that it does have value. It doesn't necessarily mean it's easy. It doesn't necessarily mean that we should be super happy about it, but it's understanding that it does have value and importance. I know for myself, this year I've really had to deal with the idea of what suffering is about. Between the book that I reviewed this month and Failing Forward, which is also about failure and in a lot of ways about suffering, I really had to come to a crossroads of understanding how much I will go out of my way beyond all costs to avoid suffering, and how I need to change the lens and my perspective on what suffering is. Suffering can be the catalyst that we need to move us to something better. It's often coming out of situations where I have had suffering. It's made me appreciate those around me more. It's made me appreciate what I have more. And it's usually moved me to a place that I have become happier and healthier long term, even though in the short term, it was a really, really difficult time. It's important that we learn how to embrace suffering, and I know for myself that has not been an easy thing, especially with this website. I have to say that moving from a job that was completely different to learning a whole new set of skills, having to learn how to build a website, do videography, work towards things that I am not always necessarily great at, and being able to see that every setback is helpful has not been easy. There has been many a week where I'm like, I'm going to just forget about this. It's time to go back and get myself a real job and just go back to what I was doing. Being an analyst was so easy. And honestly, I look at it and it's hard. It's hard to embrace suffering. Having to learn new things, have it fail, learn more things, have things fail, maybe make a few steps forward, learn some more new things, have things fail even worse, then pick up yourself, be like, no, I can do this, and learning more new things. And all of that, it's not easy. It feels like constant suffering. And that doesn't make it not worth the journey, because I find that the resilience it can bring, the things we can learn about ourselves through it, are really the things that are the most important of this journey. And so suffering really does need to have its place in my life, even though I'm realizing that maybe my attitude and the way I've handled suffering hasn't always been really great. So the third lesson I learned from this book is the importance of saying no. We talk about boundaries a lot in life, about how we should have boundaries, but what does that really mean? Mark has his definition of boundaries, which is the delineation of two people's responsibilities for their own problems. And he talks about the idea about always taking responsibility for our actions. He also talks about the idea that just because people blame us for something, or we feel blame for a situation, that's very different than taking responsibility for our actions. We may take responsibility, but that doesn't necessarily mean we are to blame. And I think it's really important that we understand that, because that will keep us in a place where we can always choose to be responsible for our actions, but realizing that it's not always up to us to take the blame in a particular situation. So what do good boundaries look like? Usually, the hard thing about good boundaries is either people are trying to get us to take responsibility for their actions, or we are taking on too much responsibility for somebody else's actions. So it's really important about the idea of being able to take our own responsibility for our own actions, but leaving other people and trusting that they are able to handle the responsibility for their own behavior. So creating boundaries isn't always the easiest thing, and it really starts with having good values. By understanding what your values are and how they are important to you, it's going to help you build good boundaries. Really, boundaries are just saying no or rejecting things that are not important to you. And rejection seems like a really harsh word, but we reject everything in our lives. By not abusing substances, we are rejecting something. By saying yes to our families, we are accepting something. And so it's really important that we understand that rejection in the way of boundaries is part of the process. It's part of understanding that these are the things I value. These are the things that are important. And I'm not going to give them up for something I do not value. And with having good boundaries brings us so much freedom that every time we have a boundary, we narrow what's our choices. We narrow what's important to us. We narrow what we're going to spend our time on. And the more we narrow that down to the things that are most important to us, that allows us to have deeper connection, put more focus onto those things that are the most important things in our lives. Just by being able to have that narrowing of choices, it allows us not to second guess what we're doing. It doesn't make us feel like we're missing out because we've made our choices. We know why we are spending the amount of time we are at home with our families over going out and doing something else. We know why we have chosen a particular hobby or skill to work on, even if no one else understands it. These are really important things for our lives, that we are able to have good boundaries, that we can make good choices, and in that feel that freedom and sense of purpose to really fulfill the life that we really want. So these are the 3 lessons that I learned from the subtle art of not giving a fork. I hope that you have enjoyed this video. If you have, if you could like it, subscribe to my channel, and click the notification button so you don't miss out on any future videos. I also have a website, hopalongstudio.com, where I have other self-care articles, and as well as art techniques to help you work on your personal self-care habit. I hope that you have a really great week, and I will see you next time.